Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Statecraft episode 38. I apologize for the slight delay in getting started here. Had a little thing I had to deal with before getting up and running here. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Statecraft, this is a podcast all about the state of the legal craft cannabis industry. Though I guess with today's episode, some people would maybe say, hey, this isn't legal. I think the BC government is one of those people. The city of Victoria disagrees with that assessment, as do many others. But yeah, we'll get into that. I guess above all else, you want to facilitate interesting discussions on the state of craft cannabis in Canada. And legal craft cannabis is rooted in medical activism and support of medical patients. So I'm really excited to have one of the most legendary legends in that world here today as a guest. And I'll introduce Mr. Ted Smith later on after doing a few housekeeping and introductory things. For those of you who haven't been to the live streams before, we have a dedicated chat section. It's so much more fun when you guys interact and comment and say whatever you want to say as we are doing our thing here. We have a separate dedicated questions tab. So if you have any questions for myself or Ted as we go through this, please go on in there. Ted, Jess, thanks for saying hi. Anybody else who's here who wants to say hi, please do so. Last thing I'll do before we get started is a land acknowledgement. So I live in the traditional unceded territories of the Sinixt people, and through intermarriage, the Tanaha people. And it's been really sad living in Nelson because the population of Sinixt here went from thousands, about 100, 150 years ago, somewhere in that kind of region, to less than 10 today. And most of that is as a result of different scalping programs that existed where just people were massacred. It came through the sabotage of their traditional hunting, fishing, farming lands, and through the building of dams illegally that went completely against all the treaties that were signed, that just destroyed all of their land that they relied on. It was technically legal because the BC government, I believe, I think it's the BC government, not the federal government, declared them as extinct, which allowed them to get past the treaty that they had signed, but they weren't actually extinct. And I think it's only in the past 5 or 6 years the BC government has officially retracted that claim. And I like to speak to this because I think too many land acknowledgements that I hear here in Canada are pretty bullshit. I'll just put it that way. They're very superficial. They don't actually say anything of substance. It's just hey, I'm checking off the thing that I said, but it's not coming from the heart. It's not coming from the soul. There's no real meaning behind it. And that's not the point of a land acknowledgement. It's not just to be able to say, hey, I checked off the thing. It's about really speaking to what's going on in a way that comes from the heart. And I get really frustrated when I hear people just do a very non-connected acknowledgement. So whoever you are, wherever you might be, all of Canada is founded on genocide. That's just a fact. And I really hope that wherever you are, you learn about what happened to the people that came before you. That's the first step to any kind of meaningful reconciliation, is to actually understand the truth of what happened. And the best way to do that is to reach out to your community, reach out to the people around you, learn what happened to the first people before you on the land that you're on. In some places, it's quite gruesome, like here in Nelson. In others, it's not quite that bad. Interesting fact, the societies, the nations, of the First Nations that were matriarchal, where they had women leading the nations, they were generally the ones that were massacred. The ones that were more patriarchal were generally the ones where the church was okay, we can work with men. And so they got harmed and destroyed a lot less, which I find, very gross, but also very interesting at the same time. So that's a big part of why in Nelson, the Snipes were slaughtered so badly because it was a matriarchal society. It still is a matriarchal society, which the church was just not down with women being in positions of power. Anyway, with all that depressing truth being shared, let's shift gears into something that's also depressing, but in a different kind of way. Specifically, how Ted is being treated by the government for simply trying to help medical patients have access to medicine. And without any further ado, I'm going to shrink myself back down so Ted and I are equal here. Ted, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sir.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. Ted, for our audience, we know that Ted is a bit laggy in the video today, but the audio is coming through clearly, and that's what matters. But hopefully, with a little bit of magic from the universe, we'll have fluid video the whole way through as well. Ted, so lovely to see you.
Thank you. And thank you for that awesome acknowledgement there. I find the same, that, most are, to coin a term, token acknowledgements. And when I make mine, I speak openly of the stolen land and the genocide and such, but not nearly as well as you just did. So I just want to thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for saying something. I appreciate that. I've gotten lots of feedback. People have been very very into how I do it, because it's different from what most people do and what most people are comfortable doing. Not everybody's comfortable kind of like naming this kind of stuff. Like, I don't know, I didn't grow up here, and I know a lot of like white people in this area have what they call white guilt, which I don't really understand because it's just not an experience of mine, but I can imagine how that might be something that really affects people, but I don't know, not something I know too much about. But what I do want to know more about today is you, Ted. And I was wondering if you could share like a thing or two about who you are and what your brief history is, even though your history is not brief in this cannabis industry that we're
in. Yeah, we're sort of joking that I'm writing a Netflix series. We're in season 6 right now.
Nice.
Because I've been doing this work for 28 years. And every 5 years we could make like 15 episodes. That's just like 3 a year. So like, I got a lot of stories.
And I imagine every like 5 or 6 years is another whole like, hey, the government's trying to stop you getting this other way, even though it hasn't worked any of the other times before.
Yeah. I really do feel like it will be a story told like that one day, because there's too much to even get into a movie, honestly. It's been quite the journey. And so I was born and raised in Ontario, 7-generation farmer on both sides, and dairy farming near Stratford. And then went to Wilfrid Laurier, started in economics and math, got a philosophy degree, and struck it out west, and came across a group called Hempology 101. And I was already doing some writing, and I thought that I should write the book about cannabis. That, the reason that cannabis was illegal was primarily because people were ignorant about what its uses were and why it was made illegal. And so I thought, to promote hemp in particular as an alternative to cutting down trees for paper and fuel and food and all those things was really what got me mostly behind this, as kind of an advocate for my family that are farmers that basically got robbed by Wall Street and the industrialist here. And so I started so I came across Hempology in Vancouver, and then I moved over to Victoria to start up a chapter over here and write my book and start up a club at university.
And your book is called Hempology 101 as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the history and uses of cannabis. And so it's available online. If you go to the Cannabis Digest, which was a newspaper I published, you can find the entire book there. And yeah, so when I moved here in September 1995 to start that, I began meeting patients that used cannabis as medicine, and began to hear about the San Francisco Cannabis Buyers Club that Dennis Perron was running. And so at that point, and then I met a baker who made cookies and brownies and stuff that was helping AIDS patients.
Yeah.
And so I saw how that helped people. And at that stage, I was just living in a van. We made a pamphlet. I got a pager, and I started the country's first compassion club. And a couple months later, got an apartment, and then a few years after that, got a store, and then started to get arrested, and all sorts of things have been going on since then.
Arrests!
Well,
Yay!
although in the beginning, I actually saw myself as having to get arrested in order to make the changes necessary. So I studied the law right from the very beginning. Initially, there was no case law in cannabis, so I studied the Morgentaler decision because that talked about
sorry to
people's
interrupt.
rights.
Can you clarify what case law means?
Oh, case law is the judicial decisions that have been handed down since the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms was brought into effect, and I think that was 81 or something.
So this is like cases within the court system specifically that have gone through trial and some kind of... Okay.
So the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is actually pretty new. It was in 1981 that was brought into effect. And so since 1981, when someone's been charged with something that they think was wrong, they could argue sections of the Charter of Rights. There's actually two stages. The first is to prove that your rights have been violated in some way. But then the Crown actually has an opportunity through Section 1 to argue that even though your rights have been violated, it's in the best interest of the public for reasons of public safety that those rights are violated. An example would be public nudity. We could argue that we have the right to be naked, but that right is sort of trumped by everyone else's right to not have naked people running everywhere.
Yeah. So for you, then, getting arrested was your mechanism by which you could trigger a court case, and that was your intention.
Yeah. So my whole point was to get arrested under the right circumstances, so that I could get in front of the judge, argue that the law is unconstitutional, and then have the changes happen. And so that's something that most people that have gotten involved in the cannabis industry haven't started from, where it's like, I need to be arrested almost as many times as possible. And so I was doing the Buyers Club for a few years, and at some point I got frustrated with the lack of progress. And so I was not only doing like 420s at university, but I started to have pot cookie giveaways downtown, and got arrested giving out 420 pot cookies one year.
Is this during 420 or just a random day?
It was International Medical Marijuana Day. Which is a day we've kind of done stuff on for many years now. And so, it was sort of a stunt. Again, literally trying to get arrested to prove that, the law, couldn't hold water. And that was in November 2000. And the Parker decision, which was really the base of the medical marijuana program, had already been laid down, but the medical marijuana program wasn't in effect yet. And so I saw this opportunity to challenge the law at a time where it was quite weak. It was.
So walk us through that. What was like, you're saying that you gave away these pot cookies downtown. I assume downtown Victoria on International Medical Marijuana Day. What day of the year is that, by the way? I haven't heard of that day before.
It used to be November 15th, and now we've moved it to June 11th. which is
Okay.
the anniversary of the Owen Smith decision, the unanimous Supreme Court of Canada decision in 2015 that eventually made edibles and extracts legal.
Okay.
And so getting arrested for the pot cookie giveaway was an incredible learning experience for me. We actually ended up having a jury trial. I had a jury for a week go to court every day to learn about cannabis cookies. We were arguing that they were so weak in THC content that they were effectively no more potent than the 0.3% that was allowed for hemp. And while they tested positive for THC, they never tested the amount of THC in them. But eventually the jury decided that I was guilty as hell. And I got a 1-day sentence, which ended up being literally like 2 hours of processing in the jail cells. So, I got a lot of publicity out of that. Got to, talk a lot about the cookies.
What was your goal with it? What was before getting arrested? Why you said that you gave away these 420 pot cookies with the goal of being arrested. What were you trying to challenge in the law at that point in time?
Well, trying to challenge just the general authority of the law. And both because the year before I actually got away with giving 101 pot cookies, and a police officer stood there and watched me. They didn't know what to do the first year. So the next year I thought, okay, I'm going to go for 420 cookies. And so, the point was to bring attention to the fact that cannabis could be used as an edible and that it was extremely beneficial for medical purposes, for cancer patients, for AIDS patients, for people in chronic pain. We didn't have the opioid crisis at the time, but we did have the AIDS crisis, and people were dying quite rapidly of the drug cocktails and things. And so, cannabis as a smoke product was good to help control, the nausea and stuff. But when people with AIDS started to eat cannabis, they literally like put their weight back on and go back to work and live again.
Yeah.
And so, that was really, even by 2000, that crisis was starting to wane, but it was still very, very real.
Okay, so between that moment and then, I think you said 2015, 2016, VCBC, Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club, flourishes in a manner of ways. And I assume when you said Owen Smith, you are the Smith of Owen Smith. Is that correct?
No. There's a lot of confusion about that.
Okay.
So, so the club got raided after my cookie giveaway 4 times in 2002, 2003. After the third raid, I actually ran for mayor because I thought I was going to jail, so I wanted to give myself something to do. And then after the election, they raided me again.
How did you do that election? I'm curious.
I didn't do that great, but it was more of a stunt than it was an attempt to be elected. Honestly, I wouldn't want the job. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And then we ended up beating all those charges in court. And in one of the cases that we won at the Court of Appeal, the Crown actually at first successfully convicted us of selling cannabis resin in the cookies and food products. And that's when I went down a real rabbit hole and learned about the law in terms of edibles and extracts compared to cannabis marijuana, which had been made legal in the Parker decision. And so when Owen got arrested in 2009, and so Owen is a friend of mine. I met him as a student. We share the same name. We almost look like brothers. People ask me if he's my kid but no, he's just a very dear friend. And he was in the bakery in 2009. You'll get a kick out of this. Yeah, he was one of the DJs at the event where you were beatboxing. He was the first DJ. Yeah,
that was the Owen. Oh,
yeah, that's the Owen. So anyway,
cool. I liked him. He was cool.
Owen doesn't listen all the time. And so we told him, don't have any pot in the bakery. So if the police show up at all, then there's nothing but like butter and stuff. We did the extraction somewhere else and literally like carry the butter over there. And he played his music so damn loud that the neighbor eventually called up the manager and the police to have it shut down because they could smell, drugs because somebody down the hallway was actually cooking isopropanol and they blamed it on us. The police show up, knock on the door. They open up the door, and the police right away see a joint that Owen's rolling on the table, and that gave them just cause to come in, and they busted him. But for me, that was the best opportunity I'd had in my life, and so we, challenged that to the Supreme Court of Canada and won a unanimous decision and knocked it out of the park. And in a way, it was not only huge for medical marijuana patients that could suddenly, either use these products legally, buy them legally, or talk to their doctors about it. But it was huge for the medical community, because before that decision, cannabis was something that was smoked and they would discredit it for that reason. And all of a sudden they had to start thinking about all the other options, suppositories and creams and, all these other things that are suddenly on the table for the medical community. But it also really ignited the business community in terms of them seeing all the value added products that could be made out of cannabis, and, drinks and things, and, all this stuff that they could be, turning into other goods. And so that decision was in 2015, and I'm certain it was, one of the final straws in the Liberal Party deciding that they would support full legalization, because the prohibition of cannabis was seriously failing at that point. Because the other thing that our decision did that was quite interesting is after we won in the lower court in 2012. The cities of Vancouver first and Victoria later created bylaws to give licenses to medical marijuana dispensaries, because it was acknowledged that Health Canada's programs weren't
sufficient,
giving access to all the products that patients needed. Like it was that absurd that anybody in their right mind was like, well, okay, yeah, they don't sell cookies. Well, yeah, patients need cookies. And so that court decision was used to start the dispensaries, which really led to a proliferation of illegal dispensaries in almost every province in the country. In some cases, like Toronto and Vancouver, over 100 stores. In Victoria, we had over 30. And so the court decision had impacts on many layers. And it was to the point where, no one could really foresee it standing up after our court decision, and legalization happened pretty quick after.
Okay, so then let's fast forward a bit. You guys have directly played a very pivotal role in establishing cannabis and cannabis products as not only a viable but a necessary thing for medical patients here. You paved the way for a huge industry to emerge in quasi-legal territory, but still it did emerge, and it existed for quite a few years. 2018, legalization happened. A lot of these dispensaries that you're just talking about get shut down for various reasons. And today, 5 years after that, there remains only one Compassion Club in Canada, and that is the first Compassion Club in Canada, which is the Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club that you started. Can you walk us through why did most of the other Compassion Clubs close? And I'm not really including all the dispensaries that you talked about here, because a lot of these, they weren't really Compassion Clubs. They were, more business opportunities. I'm sure many of them were and did really focus on medical patients. And but yeah, in your mind, for the Compassion Club specifically, the ones that have existed for longer and have weathered a lot of storms, what changed legalization?
Well, yeah, there was still a core group of old Compassion Clubs, nonprofits like the BC Compassion Club, that were operating when legalization first hit. But the threats of fines and raids were really intimidating, especially when they first started. So the other Compassion Club here in Victoria, Vic's, they closed their doors down, and before the raids started in town here. because they just didn't feel the capacity to go through all that. Sadly, the BC Compassion Club in Vancouver, it was really finances that dictated them to shut their doors. Their sales declined, and they just weren't able to navigate into the legal system in a way that would have sustained them. And so they were trying to work their way in, and they just ended up collapsing. Yeah, I think in Ontario and Toronto, it was the fear of the law that made them shut down preemptively. So in Montreal, they got raided and shut down with their Green Cross. So yeah, the change in from criminal to administrative law, in a way, just seemed a lot more threatening to a lot of people. And it was, I think, hard to find good board members because your property and assets could get seized. And yeah, it's been really sad to see them, falling apart.
So what's different, if anything at all, with the VCBC? Why have you guys continued? Because I assume all these challenges that you're talking about, you guys are facing too. It's not like you guys have this magic bubble where this stuff doesn't affect you. Like, you have been hit with $6.5 million worth of fines. You have been raided 3-4 times. Like, you've been evicted. Like, you're you're dealing with a lot of bullshit. So what is it about you guys that has led to you continuing to persevere despite all these challenges?
Well, I'm a pretty stubborn guy. And, I guess, I got into this a long time ago based on my principles, not because of anything that I owned. I started literally with the backpack. And it's something that, the only thing I have to lose, I figure, is my integrity. Which would happen if I just gave up without a fight. And so, and there's been a lot of things happen over the years that have given me the incentive to fight for patients. One is that I fell in love with a member of the club 20 years ago, and Gail was actually fighting for her life when we went to the Supreme Court of Canada. She testified in that trial, and we kept her alive for 2 years by using cannabis suppositories and other medicines that would never have been available if we hadn't have fought for that. And I actually had to quit after she passed away for a while. And then our club was failing, and I could see how legalization was going to decimate it, and I couldn't let that happen. And so I came back to the club. It took a lot of work to get it back on its feet, and prepare for this fight. We weren't really even prepared when the raid started, but we were prepared enough that we have withstood this onslaught of 3 raids, and we're anticipating after the last raid that the fines will total well over $20 million if they use the same formulas. But that's just a number. We filed both lawsuit and injunction against the federal and provincial governments now that will hopefully suspend at least any more punitive measures until we've gotten in front of a judge. There's no guarantee of that until we really get the injunction, but it seems, knock on wood, that's worked. We've also filed for oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you a question about that, but maybe yeah, I'll ask you the question, and then you can choose either to answer it or to continue with what you're about to say there. You're talking earlier about how you wanted to get arrested, you wanted to have all these things happen to give you an opportunity to go through the court system to challenge the law in different ways. Do you feel similarly about what's going on now with these fines and these raids, or does it feel different in some kind of way to you?
Oh, I definitely see a need for us to get in front of a judge to make the changes that are necessary here. I don't think there's the political will to do it. And there's no push in the industry for medical storefronts. There certainly is for the 10 milligram limit, which is kind of half of our challenge. But I don't see anything happening anytime soon unless there's a judge behind it. And I have all the confidence in the world in our lawyers and in our evidence. And I know that Health Canada is lacking in any evidence or arguments to justify their position. So yeah, I'm in some ways I can't get to court fast enough.
Okay. And so is your kind of what I'm taking away from what you're sharing here, and correct me if my assumptions are wrong here, because they are assumptions just based on little snippets you've shared here. But my takeaway is that your goal is to establish the necessity through courts of having medical focused storefronts, and to not have storefronts exclusively be for recreational purposes, because that's just not meeting the needs of medical patients, and medical patients have, to put it figuratively, have been thrown to the wayside by legalization. Is that an accurate summary of kind of where you're at, or am I missing stuff here?
Yeah. So we've applied for an exemption from Health Canada to have storefront medical access, because right now the federal program, the medical marijuana program, is mail order only. And so we want to be able to provide educated advice to patients. It doesn't necessarily have to be a pharmacist, in our opinion. We really hope that Health Canada develops some type of kind of training program, like a cannabis nurse of a type, so that people could specialize in helping people with cannabis as medicines. Because right now the rec stores can't give any advice.
Side note there, Canada actually, as of April 20th this year, has had their very first holistic cannabis nurse program. It was created by Kayla Sanmartin. We had her as a guest in a previous episode here, and she talked about it there. There, Nick has already shared the program itself. And if you guys want to find the podcast episode too, that'd be awesome. But yeah, she was talking about how it was approved by the College of Physicians and Nurses. I don't know what it's called, whoever approves kind of programs, but they had to be very, very hush hush about it. The medical system that exists didn't really want people to know about cannabis. There's a lot of we're going to let it happen, but you can't advertise it, which I just find it speaks a lot to the political reality that exists here. But sorry, I just wanted to share that. Nothing to do with Health Canada. This is not a Health Canada organized thing, but just wanted to flag that exists now.
Oh, the colleges have a lot of power, and they are incredibly conservative and anti-cannabis in every way.
Yeah.
And they're not wanting their doctors to be educated about it. And Health Canada has this, funny setup where, the college is the ones that actually write the exams for doctors to become qualified. And the college refuses to put any questions about the endocannabinoid system on those exams. And so the doctors don't have to know anything about cannabis at all.
That's fucked up, though, because it's the endocannabinoid system is not just about cannabis.
I know.
All of us when we're weird, our mom's milk has cannabinoids in it. This is a major part of how we develop mentally.
Right? So,
that is mind-boggling to me.
And so Health Canada can wash their hands clean and say, well, we don't write the exams. We can't make doctors learn about the endocannabinoid system. And because the college doesn't have it on their exams, the doctors don't have any incentive to learn about it when they're getting their degree, because they have to learn about everything else that they are getting tested on. So why study this whole other system if it doesn't matter to them.
That is
Right?
so gross and egregious that like a system that is literally a cornerstone of our mental development, of our whole physical development, not just the mental
Right?
one. The thing that
Yeah.
helps regulate our hormones. Every time baby are stressed, they have a little bit of breast milk, they get cannabinoids in their system, it helps calm them down. Like it is a major part of our development and we would be fucked without it. Like how
Yeah.
is that not like a requirement for doctors to
So,
understand? Like it boggles my
there's this
mind.
sort of like systematic discrimination against cannabis as medicine that's deeply entrenched in the medical community, in part because they really burned with tobacco. Because for years they told people tobacco smoking wasn't so bad, and there'd be doctors in the ads smoking cigarettes and shit, and they burned pretty bad for that. And so because of all the reefer madness that's been poured down their neck, their throats for years, that they are some of the worst prohibitionists that we're up against.
Which is just so fascinating because you look back at like the 40s, the 50s when cannabis was really starting to become like super illegal down in the US. Like the American Doctors Association was one of the biggest proponents of no, let's not do this. They had a giant petition with thousands and thousands of doctors across the country all saying cannabis is medicine. We need this for our patients. We need this. Don't take this away from us. This is huge medicine. And so I find it fascinating that just in 80 years, 70 years, whatever it's been, like there's been such a radical shift in the rhetoric around it from that community.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay, so let's come back to where we're at now with the VCBC. You've been hit with these fines. They're $6.5 million currently. You're expecting them to approach or exceed $20 million. You've applied for an injunction, and you are wanting to see a court case. You were starting to say something else. There was another thing that you were doing, but I interrupted.
So it's all good. So I mentioned we've put in an exemption application. Half of that is about the storefront access. The other half is about the 10 milligram limit being inadequate. And so that exemption application was turned down by Health Canada, which was what we expected. We didn't expect them to just agree like, yeah, okay, you're right. You got the support of the city, so you're cool. Because we do. We've got multiple letters from our city council giving us very strong support and basically telling Health Canada that we need an exemption and that the city will do everything in its power to help with the process. So that's been pretty awesome. But we expected them to turn it down from the beginning, which is why our initial application contains literally over 300 letters of support from our members and the city council and drug policy researchers. It includes testimony and evidence from another case in Alberta that actually struck down those two regulations as unconstitutional as well. And
wait, which two regulations?
The 10 milligram limit and the mail order only program.
Okay.
And so we included the entire transcript from the Howell decision in with our exemption application, because Health Canada on record has no good argument left for why a medical marijuana store can't be included in the regulations. In the past, they used to say because of diversion that people would be inclined to, buy it for recreational uses. Well, that's not going to fly anymore in court.
Yeah.
And so they really don't have any good arguments for the lack of medical marijuana storefronts, except they just don't want to make the effort. Is about it.
Yeah.
And so we've applied for a judicial review of that exemption denial. And honestly, we're actually hoping that the judicial review goes to court before the injunction and lawsuit, in part because the judicial review would just focus on those two parts of the law and whether it was in the public interest to give us an exemption, whereas the injunction honestly has several other tests to determine whether or not the government should actually intervene, or the courts and intervene in what the government's doing. And it will be a longer and more difficult battle Whereas if we win the judicial review and then go into court for the injunction, we're coming on a winning note. So we'll see. It's hard to say which one will proceed first. Neither Health Canada nor the province seem to be in a rush to go to court with us, in part because they probably fear that they'll lose and that suddenly.
Do they have any control over whether or not that happens? Because I thought like a big part of the Canadian political and justice system was that the will of the government on I'll call it the operational side is very different and separated from the government on the more like upholding the law side and reviewing the law. So how much sway would Health Canada or the BC government? Because you just said they're no rush to make this happen, but do they have any control or sway over how quickly this does or doesn't happen?
They do in terms of how many sort of applications and questions that they bring into court. Often, before you get in front of a judge, they want to make sure that all the evidence is on the table and that the arguments are known in advance. And they're just arguing for time to prepare and just bringing up different points of law that we need to consider and comment on before we get in front of a judge. And so so typically they'll want enough written material from both sides before
they
you actually
being
get into the courtroom.
The judge, the court. Who is they in this context?
The Health Canada, and so or the province. So
they'll want things from both sides. Okay.
Or the courts. Yeah, the court. The judges will want all the arguments basically in writing before they even get into the courtroom.
Okay.
And so because we've just filed these within this year, the government lawyers are basically saying, well, we need more time to prepare the full breadth of arguments and get all the evidence necessary.
So is there a process that you have access to by which you could get a judge or a court to give them like a deadline of, hey, you have until this time to provide this evidence? Because otherwise, what's to stop them from just like indefinitely letting it go because they just don't want to have this ever move forward?
You know what? I'm actually meeting with Kirk tomorrow, and that's one of my questions now. I had assumed that things would have been proceeding before now, and we're just kind of like sitting ducks on a pond. So it would be good for many of us to have this moving ahead. But really, I don't know how much we can force it to happen.
Okay. And for those of you here, Kirk is Kirk Tusaw, who's a former cannabis lawyer who is now again a practicing cannabis lawyer. Has he returned to his practice?
Yeah, Kirk stopped practicing and worked with, that great gardener guy whose hat you're wearing. Him and Matt Barron, got a company together. They met when Matt was actually growing for the other Compassion Club that was in town. And Kirk represented him. They became best buds. Legalization hit. Kirk's like, you know what? I'm done fighting. Let's get a company going. They've got it up and off the ground. But it has literally been so damn tough for them to make a go of it that Kirk's decided to get back into practicing law, at least part-time. And the timing couldn't have been better for us. So it's great to work with them again.
And was Kirk involved in some of your previous court cases that you mentioned?
Yeah. We didn't hire him to start with, but eventually he took over the case with Owen Smith. Okay. And so he was the one that knocked it out of the park. In fact, you can find on our YouTube page the 3 hours of court in Ottawa when we were before the Supreme Court of Canada, and Kirk was making his arguments. And the best part of that, and I've watched it several times, is how the Supreme Court judges literally like pick on the Crown lawyer because the lawyer for Health Canada was trying to argue that smoking was the only safe, effective way to use cannabis as medicine.
I remember
judges were like, "You're literally out of your mind." The one justice told him, You know, I really don't understand what you're saying, but you know, don't keep trying anymore. You know, just keep moving on because you're just not making any sense to me at all right now.
I remember because you
Um,
you and Kirk, we booked you guys to give a talk at that the stage that we
oh
put
yeah,
together in Edmonton, and you guys gave a talk on the history of compassion clubs. And I remember Kirk was telling the story. He's like, yeah, the moment that I knew we won that court case was when the judge kind of like looked down at the Health Canada lawyer, and he was like, so you're telling me that Health Canada's position is that smoking is safer than eating? And and the,
right.
the the lawyer guy said, yes, that is our position. And he just face palmed being the judge, and that was the moment that he knew that you guys had won the court case.
Yeah.
Kirk told it way better than I did, but it's
Fair.
that moment stuck in my mind. You guys are great at telling
Yeah.
that story.
Yeah, that was actually the initial judge. That wasn't the Supreme Court judges.
Oh, that
But
was
yeah,
earlier in the okay before it went all the way up.
yeah, the
Okay.
very first judge we got in front of, he
Why
wasn't
did
really
Health Canada
buying
keep
it,
trying that bullshit argument? I mean, like, they're Health Canada. They should know that smoking is way more harmful, full of carcinogens, than
right?
eating something. Like, why would they ever try to like dig deeper into that? That just makes no like. That's they should know that's gonna fail from the start.
Well, the thing is Health Canada, even to this day, doesn't really accept cannabis as good medicine. They have been forced into this through court decisions.
Yeah,
And so they've resented medical marijuana from the very beginning. They hate everything about it. And so they aren't, you know, or weren't just willing to just like open up the door and go, yeah, you can do whatever you want with it.
yeah.
It was, yeah, something that, you know, like I say, just inherently they've resisted any use of cannabis as medicine at all.
Yeah. Man, it's crazy to me. It's like here's this medicine that can help with so many conditions, so many ailments, so many diseases, get people off addiction. And guess what? On the scale of things, it's pretty safe. It doesn't have side effects in the same way that
Right?
the pharmaceutical drugs people are pushed towards tend to have. Like yes, for certain people, certain kind of brains, myself included, it can induce paranoia and anxiety. But you know what? Suppositories. They're a thing. You can get that medicine and not get the side effects. So that like it just boggles my mind that we have this thing. I'm just going to use just suppositories, cannabis suppositories. That's it. Amazing medicine that gives you such great uptake of these cannabinoids and terpenes that really help in such amazing ways. Can literally kill cancer, and yet without side effects, and yet it's like just totally unaccepted by the status quo medical system that exists. And thankfully, there's a lot of doctors that are starting to shift, and lots of nurses and nurse practitioners that are starting to shift. But even then, they're very rarely public about it because there's so much stigma around it that if somebody were to be publicly supportive of cannabis, they get negative repercussions from their colleagues, from their community that they're part of. So I just don't understand how like the stigma is so deep that all evidence is ignored. Literally all the evidence is just completely ignored, and instead we're just gonna stick to I'm gonna call it the party line because it just really feels like it's like, oh, we're collectively agreeing to this thing that goes against what we do otherwise, which is using science and research to make decisions on things. Um, but then again, like I don't know how much corruption there is within the medical system. I mean, you see these horrible pharmaceutical companies that bribe in so many different ways, and the biggest criminal case ever, the biggest criminal fine ever globally was towards one of the big pharma companies. Which one? It was one of the Nick. You
Is it
probably know this.
Pfizer?
Yes, it was Pfizer. I think it was Pfizer. Yeah, they had lied and were very deceptive around the side effects of medicine that they had going on, and they like got all these different medical patients hooked onto all these pharmaceutical drugs, and they got hit with like a $20 billion, oh no, $2.3 billion fine. Thanks, David. Appreciate the assist there. And that's the largest criminal fine ever. So that's like when that's the reality on one side, like I just don't know how deep this goes, because that's the thing that was caught, you know? Like what else is happening that isn't caught? Like how many doctors are lining their pockets with money coming from the pharmaceutical industry? How much is that affecting their policies? How much is the pharmaceutical industry paying for the labs and the research that happens in the university research system? And how much is that affecting this reality? Because I guarantee you the pharmaceutical system does not want cannabis to be medicine, because cannabis like will straight up like remove the need for, I don't know, like a quarter of the drugs that they produce. Like that's just a number I'm throwing out of my ass, but like cannabis is a magical medicine. I'm sure you know it, which is why you have been on this journey for the past 28 years of your life, despite all the bullshit that keeps getting thrown at you. And I just don't get it. It's like, here's this opportunity to help people. Why make it hard? like people's lives are at stake here. People could live comfortable lives, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure you agree. I'm preaching to the choir here, but
Well,
it makes
it
no
is.
sense, dude.
It's a war of ideals, and so there's a lot of different worldviews out there. But we're up against ideals about what medicine is, how medicine works, but also about conformity to the law. That we live in a part of the world where typically everything is hyper regulated. People are told what color their house can be and whether they can dry laundry on a line in their yard. There's so many areas of life in this country and in certain places and cities that are hyper regulated, and we as a society have just kind of like bent over and complied, and our government is all about compliance in all sorts of ways. That's kind of what they do, and it's really hard for them to acknowledge that sometimes there is a gray area where people shouldn't be compliant. Because they think if the law is wrong, then it'll be fixed in court, and when that's done, then they'll comply with the law at that point. But they don't see that gray area to exist, and so in a way, that's one of the harder ideals that we're up against here, is to be able to argue to people that we're in this still, even though there's been a medical program for 2 decades, to tell them that there's still significant constitutional flaws with it is sometimes a hard sell. But it's something that these are ideals are ultimately what we're up against. We're not up against any individual person. The people that I've had to fight, whether it's been Crown lawyers or police officers, like there haven't been any politicians really around brave enough to argue against me. But those that I have, it's their ideals that I'm up against, and if I can change their way of thinking about those ideals, which I have done, obviously, or I still wouldn't be here. Well, then there's some room to grow. Unfortunately, in North America here, the bulk of the population still believes in big corporations, and they work for them. They purchase their products from them. They get their entertainment from them. They're very immersed in the corporate world. Other parts of the world aren't so entrenched in big corporations. Certainly, in South America or other places. Hopefully, that doesn't sort of take over as it seems to have here. And I'm certain that as time progresses and changes are made, that the view of cannabis as a medicine will dramatically change, and as each 5 years goes on, we're going to see some major improvements in accessibility and in product lines, and that's not necessarily because of what's even happening here in Canada, but because of what's happening around the world. We're seeing countries recognizing the difference between medical and recreational, and ensuring that there is medical access and in Canada, it's been sort of trumped for recreational, but I don't see that sustaining. The reason it is legal is because of the number of patients that use it as medicine. Even now, 50% of the people that go into the rec stores are using it for medical purposes. They just can't talk about it with the people working there. And so, I have great faith in the future of this and in using it in palliative care as well. But there's still going to be a few years of struggling before we get there.
So on that note, Ted, I kind of want to understand your vision. Do you see kind of this court case that you're trying to realize now, where you're challenging the two things, the lack of medical storefronts where you can have honest conversations and make recommendations to patients based off what they're sharing with you, and to not have those people need to be, I forget the word, not psychiatrists, pharmacists, and not have them be pharmacists who are trained in that kind of a path, and the removal of the 10 milligram limits for edibles and suppositories and so on and so forth. Do you see that as like the final thing that's needed in order to like kind of create the reality that you think medical patients deserve and need? Or is there more beyond that you foresee in the future that's going to need to happen afterwards?
Thank you. That's an awesome question. So certainly, when we win, we hope to see, small scale stores and kitchens open up across Canada that are providing medicine. But that's just like kind of phase one. The ultimate goal here is to have sort of integrated palliative care villages, I'm calling them even. Because what we imagine is to have a facility for patients that are in end-of-life care that is, right beside a garden that is growing different plants, especially different strains of cannabis that could fight certain types of cancers. And we could be making fresh products for the patients on site. The patients could go, even if they could get in a wheelchair, walk and walk around the gardens and smell the plants. But we would also have other plant medicines there on site as well, and work as closely as possible with the various First Nations across the country to develop these facilities. So we would have their, their culture, their practices, their songs, in these places. And we would have a restaurant on site as well, so that the patients in care would be getting, really high quality foods, but also so that the public could come and support the facility by, eating at the restaurant and buying some medicines or things, but also to have a range of healthcare available on site. So we would have, like a dentist and a x-ray machine and a naturopath, and wouldn't have the full complement of medical services, but certainly enough
for day-to-day needs.
That it would be more than the palliative care center would need, but it would really hook that up, and even possibly have like a little hotel on site for people that are coming to visit their family, or want to come and see the facility. And so these type of and end of life facilities are the ultimate goal. Certainly, as Nicholas mentioned, part of that would be even to have like retirement communities where people weren't necessarily towards end of life, but that's where I want to start, is in the most dire circumstances, and then kind of work our way back from there.
That's beautiful, man. How, I guess what I'm curious is like how realistic you think that is. Like, what, let's assume for a moment that in the next couple of years you're able to like find success with what you're working on now. What are the barriers that you foresee remaining to be able to realize that vision after that?
I tell you, we just need this court decision, and it will set a lot of things in motion. Because if we're able to secure injunction, it's likely that the government will appeal it, But the same arguments that we're using, apply across the entire country.
Yeah.
And I know people that would be more than happy to reopen their compassion club, or if that window is opened. And
so
so
that's why you're suing the federal government too, and not just the BC government, despite the fines coming from BC.
Well, we've got to include Health Canada, because they're writing all the rules for the province, basically. But yeah, this is applicable nationally. So when we win this court decision, we may end up helping to open up more buyers clubs in other cities like Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal, and kind of do our best to resurrect the old compassion clubs under our umbrella, and set up other kitchens, and then work towards being in full compliance through the courts. And then at a certain point, we would switch over to the legal system, and then we would be able to focus on getting some investment towards building some a pilot project, and getting the partnerships and stuff. But until we get a court decision behind us, and any of those plans are just dreams. But it is something that I anticipate will happen. I hope will happen. And it could be that in 5 years' time, we're sitting here with kitchens and compassion clubs across the country, providing medicine on kind of small scale. And we're never going to go this big Aurora kind of direction. I really see small locally owned and controlled compassion clubs being the route to go. And so because I've got experience doing that, I could see a lot of people being drawn towards that kind of a model, especially how corporate cannabis has failed so bitterly, and so in 5 years' time, it could be a completely different scene for me.
Cool, man. I've got two final questions of my own, or like one question, one kind of comment that I want to bring up that we haven't touched on yet, but that I think is important. And then we have one question in the question zone. And then after that, I'll kind of let you make any final comments you want to make. So I'll ask the question that I have first before I make the comment. And this is just a curiosity thing. You're on the island, you're in Victoria. Are there any First Nations in the area that you already have like good relationships with, that you have like brought up this vision with? Because you mentioned specifically that you wanted to do this in collaboration with First Nations here. Do those relationships exist at all, or is this more like a, hey, I'd like to do this eventually once we're past the court case situation?
They don't exist as much as I would like. In Victoria here, the Songies have opened up Seed and Stone, I believe it's called. They've sponsored the lounges the last 2 times at the Empress there. And so they're pretty entrenched in the legal system. There are a couple of reserves here that do have the illegal dispensaries proliferating. But I haven't made any attempt to go and directly interact with band councils there. There's no real apparent reason to. And we did at one point actually have our bakery on First Nations lands up in the Cowichan Valley. But unfortunately, due to some personal reasons, things just didn't work out. We had to pull our bakery out. But at one point, it was on First Nations lands with First Nations employees, and we had this little dream happening. And then, like I say, just humans got in the way. But
as happens.
As happens. But funny enough, when I was at the event in Kelowna, I was approached after sharing this dream by I think it's Jana Pooley and the other name isn't coming to me right now. Corey Brewer. We're both really quite taken by the dream that I had, and they share that, and they want me to help build there. So it could be ironic that the first one is actually built in the Okanagan.
I love that you bring up Corey's name, because he's actually our next guest on the State of Craft. Yeah? I'll talk about that in a bit here. Okay. So I didn't want to say Corey Brewer, but I was like, I bet you was going to say Corey Brewer when you were trying to think of that other name. But yeah, I'll
Yeah,
talk.
yeah, it's a
Maybe
wonderful
I'll
guy.
announce the next state of craft now, since we're already on the topic, and then I'll go back to like the comment I wanted
Yeah,
to make. So next episode, episode 39, Corey Brewer is one of the members of, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name of the nation correctly here, of the Celix Nation, which again I've never actually asked him how to pronounce it, so excuse me if that is woefully incorrect. And it'll be him and Robert Laurie, who is a well-known cannabis lawyer, and the Celix Nation is doing a lot in the cannabis space. They've created their own regulations because they disagree with how Health Canada's approach things, and they are definitely pushing the Indigenous rights to have cannabis. And BC announced, or not, they signed into law like last year, a few years ago, I forget when exactly, that the UN Declaration for Indigenous Peoples, I forget what that term is as well, but basically BC has agreed that Indigenous folks, First Nations on this land, have the right to be self-sovereign and to create their own regulations and laws. What they haven't done, though, is they've delayed the actual making that be law. They've signed into law that they're going to do this, but there's no path to actually doing it. So my guess, and I don't know for sure here. Nick is saying it's UNDRIP is the name of the of this thing that they signed into law. My guess is that the Salix Nation is going to challenge the BC government legally to be like, hey, if you're going to say that you're signing into law that Indigenous communities and First Nations have the right to self-governance, then do it. You can't say this and then not do it. You can't have it be in law that we want Indigenous people to self-govern and also not let them self-govern at the same time. So that's kind of my guess on what we're gonna get into. But I don't actually know what this is about. But that's kind of my feel. But it's gonna be all about learning about what the Salix Nation is doing and having the lawyer that's working with them on whatever it is they're doing there to kind of discuss it all. Which I'm just really excited for another fascinating conversation. So that's kind of, usually that would come at the very end, but it's coming now instead. So I like that we've had 2 episodes, this one and the next one, that's more technically illegal, but very important for craft cannabis, not only in Canada but globally, to see how things move forward with these 2 things. Because I think Indigenous rights are missing in a big way in kind of the federal political discourse, and I think medical patient rights are missing in a big way in the federal political discourse. And that'll bring me to the point I wanted to make earlier that I mentioned, what I wanted to share that we didn't touch on today, but which I think is very important and critical to bring up in any discussion of medical cannabis, which is in the legal system that exists and in the current framework that exists within the cannabis regulations for medical patients. Cannabis is inaccessible. Just from a financial perspective, it's inaccessible. Cannabis is the one medicine that is taxed in Canada and has excise duty applied to it. Every other form of medicine, you get a prescription for it. And what Health Canada has done is they've made it so that you don't actually get prescriptions for cannabis. You get what's called a medical document. And that technicality makes it so that the laws that Canada has around not being able to tax medicine for people and not being able to have duty on medicine for people does not apply to cannabis. And that increases the price of cannabis by I don't know, I'm just gonna say 30 to 50%, because it's pretty ridiculous over taxations going on currently in the regulated environment, and that can exceed 150% tax easily if we're talking about outdoor cannabis, which don't want to get into right now. We have entire episodes on the taxation structure if you guys do want to learn more about that. I think there's one great one that I'd especially recommend. Well, 2 great ones. One with Dan Sutton and one with what was her name, Brishna, and her business partner from Earth Wolf Farms. Oh, his name is escaping me. As well as Janine from Joint Venture Craft Cannabis. We had a deep dive into the numbers of excise duty and how that's really screwing people over. So very fascinating talk there. But yeah, to me, I remember, I visited you at VCBC a couple times when I was in Victoria, a month or 2 ago, and what I was shocked about is the prices. It's I looked at the suppositories and I was like, that's accessible. Like I can afford that. Like I've never bought for me, like suppositories is a big part of like the medicine that I use because cannabis is really helpful for me, but I get paranoid from using it through smoking or vaping or edibles. Um, and and so I don't really use it that way too often. Or if I do, it's because it's very high CBD extract that I'm using or something like that, where I know that the CBD will keep the more psychoactive aspects of THC in check for me. Um, and through the legal system, first off, I'm not getting the dosages that I want. So if I want to get suppositories legally, I have to use more than one. And that's like suppositories aren't a very comfortable, method of intake. So I don't want to be putting 5 of them in a row in my body. And if I do that, well, guess what? The first ones are going to be pushed up so high that now they're like getting processed by my liver and making me really anxious and paranoid instead of being in the lower part of that part of our body, so that it doesn't get processed into psychoactive form. So there's that, and it's too expensive. Like I just if I were to buy it through the Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club, I'm paying like $4, $3 for a suppository that's going to do exactly what I need and give me the medicine that I need to like relax and just calm down and have a much easier time in my experience, whatever that experience is. And I can afford it. If I wanted the equivalent of that $3-4 deposit through the legal system, I'm looking at like 20 to 30 bucks, easy. And it's just like, it's like I'm not rich, like I can't. If I was rich, it wouldn't be an issue. But guess what? Most people aren't rich, and so it's yeah. That's I think I just want to highlight that because we haven't talked about it, but I think it's also a critical piece of the puzzle that people like you bring to the table with these compassion clubs, because you have a focus on the medicine being accessible, and that is not a focus in the actual legal system that exists. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Fair. Yeah, there's a bunch of frustrating situations Health Canada has created because, as Hutch said in the chat there, doctors don't actually prescribe cannabis because there isn't a DIN number, and therefore it isn't.
David Hutchins is talking about that in the chat. What is a DIN number? Can you talk about that?
When a drug is created by a pharmaceutical company, they put it through a whole bunch of double-blind tests and give it eventually a drug identification number so that they can patent it. And so cannabis has never gotten a DIN number.
And is that because it can't be patentable, or is it because they don't want it in the system and it's just used as an excuse?
Well, no plant has ever gotten a DIN number because the regulations are so strict and require such conformity that plants can't measure it. That because there's variations in cannabinoid content and terpenes even on the same plant from one bud to the next. There isn't the type of consistency that Health Canada wants to see. Certainly not in a bud form, like you might be able to make an extract.
If you always guaranteed it's going to be 800 milligrams per gram of CBD and 100 milligrams per gram of THC or whatever, then
and so it takes years to go through the double-blind studies, and ultimately, if they got a DIN number for one of those plants, anything that was even slightly different than that wouldn't be protected by a patent. So there's no incentive for a drug company or a cannabis company to be even getting a DIN number, because even if they were able to prove that it was good for all these things, somebody else could make something just slightly different. And sort of
this one is 799 milligrams per gram of CBD, not 800.
And so it's very frustrating how limited the research is into the medical uses of cannabis. It's just not happening in this country for a few reasons, and the way that the system is set up as well, like the mail order program for medical marijuana is actually more expensive than purchasing from a recreational store. And that's in part because a number of insurance companies are working with veterans. And that was one of the first kind of groups that really caught on to this, was veterans were able to get insurance to cover their cannabis costs.
Yeah.
And so veterans across Canada are getting free cannabis because an insurance company is covering it. But when that agreement was originally made, when those agreements were made, was when bud was selling at a much higher price than it is now. And these insurance companies are locked into these inflated prices for medical marijuana. And so, you know, the big companies that are selling medical marijuana won't reduce their prices for medical marijuana because they're making so much off these insurance companies that there's no incentive to lower their prices because they'd make less money. And so if you try to buy, you know, bud mail order for medical marijuana, it's more expensive than going into a store.
And I think that's a fantastic argument for the need for compassion clubs. It's like, compassion clubs are nonprofit societies that are there to make sure that medical patients have access to the medicine that they need. Your Auroras, your Tilrays, your Canopy Growths, all these big giant companies that are part of what you're talking about here, their only incentive is to increase their share price. That's it.
Right?
That's it. These are giant corporate interests that I'm going to go ahead and say are fairly soulless. And just they don't give a fuck about your medical patient. That's not what they're after. They're after money. That's it.
Yeah.
And then you can't have the providers of medicine be people who don't give a fuck about anything but money. That also, just as a appropriate tangent and side note, is to me what's wrong with the medical system as a whole. The fact that big pharma, which provides most of the infrastructure for medical system globally, also don't give a fuck about people. All they care about is their bottom line. I think that's gross.
Very true.
Ted, okay, we've got 2 questions from the audience. I'm going to ask them both, and then I'll give you an opportunity to share any final thoughts you have, and then we'll wrap up. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds good.
Thank you to all of you who've stuck around to the very end. We were 20 minutes over time, and it's great that people are here. I asked Ted before we started, hey, Ted, if the conversation's going well, can you go a little longer? And he was like, yes, I can, which is why we've gone longer. Okay, so I'll ask Jessica Bowman's question first. She asks, has the city of Victoria always been supportive of VCBC? Did different mayors, councils have differing attitudes about it? As a Victoria local, I'm curious if different leadership eras have made life harder or easier for the Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club. And while you answer that question, I'm going to go pee because I'm about to piss my pants, and I don't want that to happen on live stream here.
Fair. Well, it certainly has changed over the years. When I started, there were a few councillors that were supportive, but the mayor, Bob Cross, got elected on Law and Order platform, and while he wasn't outright hostile towards me, they weren't that friendly. But then, things changed. Certainly, I've made an attempt to communicate with council in various ways, not only going there once a year to address them for Medical Marijuana Day. They actually give us a proclamation for that every year. But I've also spoken there many occasions. I've not only ran for mayor, but I ran for city councillor a few years ago, and really made an attempt to get to know everyone as much as possible that is either on council or running for council. And so as the years went by and the mayors changed, they were getting friendlier. The new council that was elected last year is quite different than any in the past, although I still have a couple of good old connections on council, including the fact that the mayor now, Marianne Alto, was even my employee once when I was doing nonprofit work back in the 1990s. I was doing a lot of work with youth and with community economic development activities in town. And Marianne was even sort of my employee for a short time, 23 years ago. So it's great having that kind of a connection with the mayor. She is very supportive. And I think there's a couple on this new council that might not be as supportive as we'd like. But The last council had a couple of fairly conservative members that we eventually were able to win over, and I think we could do the same here again if necessary. But I haven't had to ask this new council of anything, so we'll see.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer, which I totally heard the entire thing of, even though I wasn't here for half of it. One final question from David Hutchinson. Ted, I think First Nations are an interesting sweet spot to improve medical access and products, not least because the federal government does not want to take them on working on their own land. They certainly sell products exceeding 10 milligrams, which is a good start, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It is really encouraging to see how the First Nations are stepping up here, for themselves. Yeah, like on a personal level, I couldn't be happier with all the actions that have been taking, and yeah, I think it's awesome that I'm glad to have a chance to mention Corey and Robert Laurie coming up next week, because they've actually filed a lawsuit very similar to the one that we filed, and I've had a chance to read it, and it's I think going to really throw this government for a loop, because they've done a very poor job of including First Nations in legalization, and things could have been done so much better, but it hasn't been that way. But luckily, there are a number of First Nations across the country. I even saw how Williams Lake, which was really one of the first in BC that got a legal license, and the government made a big deal out of how this First Nations was setting up a legal store and had legal production facilities. Well, they've even now set up an illegal dispensary beside their legal one, to provide access to the products that aren't available in the legal store. So it's really neat to see so many First Nations kind of stepping up and fighting, because this is a huge opportunity for them, to improve their economics, to improve their health, to improve their social fabric, to get people off the booze and the drugs and the prescription drugs and that are just wrecking those communities. So,
and we had Chief Willie Sellers from Williams Lake First Nations on a previous episode too. So that was kind of when they were more on the start of their journey, and yeah, from what I'm picking up since then, they've been very unhappy with kind of how things have rolled out. I get the sense, and don't quote me on this because this is just my perspective as an outsider who has not had a deep dive follow up with the Williams Lake First Nation. But the sense that I get is that the government did not deliver on a lot of promises that they made, and that Williams Lake First Nation is very unhappy that they went down the legal route, given that a big part of their decision to do so was these promises that were made.
right.
So that's kind of a little unfortunate, but take that with a grain of salt, because I haven't talked to them to get the actual juicy details of what's been going on. And just one point of correction for anybody who's listening here who wants to see this next episode: it's in 2 weeks. We do an episode every 2 weeks. It's 1 week on, 1 week off. And everybody who is on here who is registered, you'll get an email automatically as soon as we hit the stop button here. That'll include a link for that next episode. Maybe before I ask you to share your final thoughts, Ted, I'll just do a quick shout out for our company Certicraft, just because I think I'd like to end the ending note to be you and your final thoughts, not the one sentence that is the ad for who we are. But so yeah, I'll do that first. So for anybody watching this, Certicraft, I'm the CEO of Certicraft. We make the headache of Health Canada and the CRA go away for licensed producers. That's kind of our whole mission. We specifically help craft cannabis producers transition into and thrive in the regulated market by making the day-to-day operational side of things just really easy. And if you are somebody who is growing or processing cannabis, or even doing the medical sales side in the legal world, we support that too. And we do fight a lot to get that changed. That's a big part of what we have done. if you're doing any of those things and you feel like you want to have an easier time of it, please reach out to us. We'd love to show you what we've built, and yeah, that's Certicraft. So, Ted, now that the ad is done, that's the sponsorship ad. Now that that is done, uh, what what are the final thoughts that you would want to leave everybody here with? What do you, if you want people to have like a takeaway, what would that takeaway be?
Well, yeah, I guess I hadn't thought of that exactly, but I guess the takeaway is that while legalization has been incredibly difficult, like far more than I think anyone really anticipated, the value of this plant and the depth of the community around it are so strong and vibrant, that I really see in 5 years' time, we're going to be in a lot better world. That there are changes that people are pushing for, and that things can only get better from here. And that there's just even too many people that tried to get into the industry right away, and you see that kind of working its way out with the big companies failing, and unfortunately smaller ones too. But in 5 years, hopefully that supply and demand will even out, because we've never seen in history anywhere a multi-billion-dollar market go from illegal to legal before. Like, even when alcohol was made legal, it wasn't near the scale of what we've seen here. And so in 5 years' time, things are going to get easier. But I know for us and for many others, it is an exceptionally difficult time to keep going. But I know many people who are deeply committed to what they're doing, you being one of them. And I really see those blue skies opening up, but there's still a lot of fighting to get to before we're there. So.
And in today's conversation, we learned a little bit about one of the fights that is gearing up, that is slowly coming together. I don't know sometimes my English is my third language, actually. So sometimes that that comes through. People are always surprised to find out that English is not my first language. But Ted, thank you so much for being here, for giving us some insight into your history and into who you are and why you do what you do, why you continue to do what you do despite all the bullshit that's thrown at you. And to the federal and BC governments, if any of you are watching this video on YouTube, please just give Ted a break and give like medical patients a break. Like, all they want is medicine that's not going to like create suicidal thoughts and other side effects that like really should like, how is that an acceptable side effect of a drug that you would take that you would start becoming suicidal? Like, just people want medicine that's going to work and not fuck them up in different ways. And I don't think that's a big ask. I really don't.
Right.
So if you were listening to this, that's my like request to you, to please like work with the Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club. They're trying to create a beautiful reality where people get the medicine they need. And wouldn't life be better if everybody just got what they needed while not harming others at the same time? Because that's all they're doing. Thanks for being here, Ted. Appreciate you and the work that you do, and we'll do what we can to support you in your fight.
Thank you so much, Sammy. It's been a great pleasure being on your show here. Thank you.
100%. Thank you. And to all our audience, thanks for being here. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you like this conversation, like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. There's going to be a whole bunch more. Bye, everybody.